Look, we've been treated very unfairly by Canada. We've been treated very unfairly by Mexico. But we've been treated very unfairly by every country all over the world.
We will apply maximum pressure to maximize our leverage. That's why today we're moving forward with a 25% surcharge on electricity exports.
Of course, with the introduction of the idea of a 25% tariff on electricity imports from Ontario, that kind of upped the ante a little bit. And I think what we've seen in terms of the response from the Trump administration is really a retaliation to that. But none of this is good. Trade wars are generally not good for either side of the discussion. And when we talk about electricity tariffs, of course, the Mid-Atlantic states in particular are very dependent on Canadian electricity.
For most people, will feel like kids in a schoolyard. Well, he did this first. But that is the dynamic that we're in. We are clearly going through an intensification cycle. And so people need to buckle up. We are, and they need to strap in, I think, for a period, because economic structural shift in economies can take time. And the United States, the newly elected leaders in the United States have made it very clear that the status quo in the global economy no longer works for the United States.
The right thing to do is what we're doing. We're going to get our jobs back, and we're not going to be left at. Now, I will say this, that already Canada, and I respect very much, as you know, there's a very strong man in Canada who said he was going to charge a surcharge or a tariff on electricity coming into our country. He has called and he said he's not going to do that. Okay, he's not going to do that.
A little while ago, I had an opportunity to speak to Secretary Lutnick. And Secretary Lutnick has sent out an olive branch to us to come down and immediately meet with him, meet with the whole trade administration, and discuss the future. Rather than waiting till April the 2nd, threats going back and forth, tit for tat, I've agreed to suspend temporarily, and we always have that tool in our toolkit, until we sit down over the next day or two.
The economy has been very strong. And for so long as the economy remains strong, it leaves the president and his government with significant buffers to pursue a dramatic realignment, a dramatic structural shift in the relationships, not just geopolitically, but geoeconomically.
But if he continues with the aluminum and the steel, I just got off the phone with Minister LeBlanc. They will respond dollar for dollar, tariff for tariff.
In many ways, you can classify aluminum as solidified, aluminum is solidified electricity. So when we think about Canada's ability to generate electricity at a very low cost using hydro, that also carries with it an environmental benefit, of course. But when we think about aluminum production and that low-cost source of electricity that goes into it, it really does create a competitive advantage for Canada. And the U.S., U.S. supply chains have capitalized on that. Free trade agreements that have long been in place, access to those low-cost supplies, that's now at threat of being disrupted. Aside from what we're seeing in the very short run, long run, if you're a developer in the United States and you're looking at steel and aluminum purchases, this injects uncertainty into the entire equation that was not present prior to recent times. This could have long-term ramifications for the nature of trade between our two countries, and at the end of the day it will raise costs, because we wouldn't be importing up almost a quarter of our steel from Canada if it wasn't the lowest cost source of supply available to us.
Policymakers understand really well headline risk. It has a term in the markets. It's called headline risk. The headline hits, and whether it's an automated system that reads an institutional news feed and instantly executes a trade, or a human that sees what's going on, sees their portfolio needs to be rebalanced, it's the same reaction function. They're reacting to the headline. And that's what markets do. They price the present value of today's risk for tomorrow. And policymakers know that, and they play it to their benefit. The reality is that headline risk right now is probably the only effective way to place any economic pressure on the United States.
If you do anything to disrupt trade, disrupt supply chains, because that's effectively what you're doing, you're increasing the cost along supply chains, which is ultimately disruptive. That raises the cost of doing business. It raises the cost of final goods and services that consumers purchase. All of that together does raise the specter of a recession potentially coming. Now, a lot of how this shakes out will ultimately depend on the longevity of these actions, right? But without a doubt, the uncertainty that it's injected is causing industry in general to hit pause on investments. And when you have that kind of impact, then that tends to play out over a longer sort of time horizon, tends to lead to slower growth. And so that's really the risk, given whatever the objective might be.
Yeah, well, I think broadly, the president's agenda is one that rightly recognizes that the U.S. has, deindustrialized over the last few decades. We've offshored a lot of our industrial capacity. If you look at sort of the performance of the working class, American, the best indicator for that is actually real median household income, growth adjusted for inflation. And that sort of peaked in the 70s. I think what the president rightly recognizes is we need to shift back to being an industrial power. If we want to be a strong nation, we have to be a nation that makes things. And to accomplish that, you need a multitude of policies working together. And tariffs are one of those policies. And we've seen, throughout our country's history, effective use of tariffs to drive domestic production. Democrats may not like the president personally, or how he goes about his business. There's a lot of Democrats that would agree that we actually need to reorient the economy more towards a working class and industrial capacity, and that's what he's trying to do. And the way to do that, like I said.
Thank you, everybody.